Off at Congressman Brad Wenstrup in studio for the full hour, and Lord knows we have a lot to talk about. And so kick back. And remember, it's going to be on podcast later, 55krc.com, where you can stream the audio. Congressman Brad Wenstrup, welcome back in the studio, my friend. It is a distinct pleasure to have you in here. And I do like that you enjoy coming in, making the extra trip to just so we can talk face-to-face. Good to see you, brother.
Yeah, it's a much better way, isn't it? You know,
absolutely. Well, let's clear the air real quick. Get it out of your system. Comment on the Bengals game before we dive into the stuff that impacts everyone, regardless of which team they support. Your son's reaction?
Well, my son is 9, let's be clear.
Okay, yeah, I know.
Most people my age have like a 30-year-old son, but, you know, my son is 9.
But he wasn't alone in his reaction yesterday.
No, it was rough. I mean, I'm feeling bad, too. And when I saw the penalty, you know, I'm sure that guy's adrenaline was flowing so much, and, you know, you got to be able to rein that in. And you have that late hit, and I just looked and I go, that's the game.
It is.
Put him in field goal range.
Right.
And that poor guy, I mean, I do feel bad for him.
I hope he's on a watch list right now, honestly.
Poor guy. So, anyway, I look over at my son, and after the field goal was made, and he's buried himself into the chair, you know, the sofa chair, and just crying. I just, you know, held him.
Good for you.
You know, I just remember how we felt when Kenyon Martin broke his leg. Like the city of Cincinnati was just, the next day, it was like a bomb had gone off. You know, people walking around with this blank stare. We were #1 all year, right? So, you know, like the Bengals are a great team, and so is Kansas City for that matter. And you know what? It's actually Kansas City is actually a team that I don't have animosity against for a lot of reasons. You know, I think they got you know, pretty decent people that you can kind of like, and I hope they win the Super Bowl. You know, so but that was rough, and you know. Look, you got to regroup. Both teams had a lot of injuries going on too, but you know.
Kansas City clearly had the benefit of the officials.
Well, I've never seen that before, where you just have this ghost play that we're just eliminating that play.
I know.
Nobody heard a whistle. If they were smart, the officials would have gotten together and said, "No one heard it. The play went on.
Yeah."
Let's go.
And more fundamentally, why don't you answer the question of why the whistle was blown in the first place? If the play was dead before it started, why? No one seems to be going down that road, Congressman. Maybe that's a congressional investigation you can launch.
We got enough to do.
After the 9,000 other ones, which is really an area I want to dive on into. And I know a lot of my listeners are going to be really, really, really pleased that they're learning for the first time this morning that you have been appointed to the Select Committee on Coronavirus Pandemic. Dr. Congressman Wenstrup, you've been following this very closely since since COVID first was uttered as a word, and what in terms of that particular select committee, what areas are you going to be looking at insofar as COVID is concerned?
Well, that's just the thing about this committee is we are under the oversight committee per se, but we're pretty independent in what we can do, but we need the oversight committee to issue subpoenas if we need them along the way. But, Brian, we're actually dealing with so many things along the way with this. This is not just an isolated thing. We are going to look at all aspects of what happened with the advent of this virus. You know, where did it come from? For one, obviously, origins of COVID is one thing. We want to ultimately be able to get to a point where we have some guidance or some recommendations for best practices when it comes to a pandemic, whether it was from nature or came out of a lab intentionally, accidentally. We have to look at the reality of what could be bioweapons, right? But also we want to look at the effects of the decisions that we were made, starting with, you know, in a bipartisan fashion, we put a lot of money out there. Well, how was it spent? Was there waste, fraud, and abuse?
Yes.
Right? And so we also want to look at the effects on our children, on education, the effectiveness of the virus itself, the reality that the vaccine itself from the beginning, we knew that it was not going to be 100% protective, you know, a little bit different than the other types of vaccines. I don't even know if we should call this a vaccine. It's more of a treatment, a preventive treatment in many ways. We have to look at the side effects of these things. I want to make
Well, you only learn the side effects after people have been taking them under an emergency use authorization for 2 blank years. I'm sorry, 2 blanking years. And then you get more and more people out. We're all a bunch of lab rats out here in the world, and they statistically now see trends which include that this vaccine may very well be connected, at least some have statistically proven it's connected to things like myocarditis. You and I were talking before the break about the blood clot issue, and you have some confirmation from among your podiatry friends that maybe COVID itself is causing blood clots. I can't remember the specifics you've concluded.
Well,
or the studies have been going on, but we're lab rats. This is what happens when you rush something to market without properly testing it. But rolling it out and telling everybody that it's going to be effective in preventing the transmission of the disease, which it isn't. It'll be effective in preventing you from spreading it to others. Nope, that's part of transmission. And maybe, I don't know. Once you had the vaccine, how bad would my COVID have been if I didn't have the vaccine? You just go around and tell everybody it's going to reduce the symptoms and you're not going to be as sick as you were. I'm sorry, that doesn't sound like a vaccine to me. Like you said, it sounds like a treatment.
Yeah, and I've said, and our doctors caucus has said for the better part of 2 years that we need to be focusing on treatments because this isn't going away, and there will be variants. That's always the case with the virus. So that's part of it. This is a multidimensional thing that really is trying to bring the work of several committees into one final report, if you will. It's going to be the committee's going to be a bipartisan committee. I hope that we have people from, I know on our side of the aisle, hope we have people on the other side of the aisle. Don't turn this into, Biden versus Trump and things like that.
Well, it's a disease. Diseases don't have politics.
Right.
And this turned into a disease with political stripes. It's just been mind-blowing to me.
And what things did we do that worked and what things did we do that we should never do again? And to, in large part too, Brian, if you think about it, we have taken physicians and real data out of the equation when you are censoring things, when you don't want to put certain things out. Who was doing that and why? So what we want to get back to is what medicine used to be, a doctor-patient relationship. You and your doctor made decisions, and it was based on data. So if you go back to the vaccine, and again, I hesitate to even call it that.
The shot.
When you go back to the shot, I'm very much in favor of it for those with had high risk because they were dying left and right. And I was in favor of using it for emergency use. But to start telling your 5-year-olds that they have to get this and, there's going to be variants. Do we really need a shot with every variant when people aren't getting deathly ill? So these are the things we need to look at as a scientific community. And in Congress, we at least have to give some guidance, put things back in the hands of, for one, doctors that are treating COVID patients, which for years, the voice of this whole thing was Dr. Fauci. He wasn't at bedside with anybody.
Right. Well, and I'm glad you mentioned Dr. Fauci because I was going to follow up on that. And are you going to be looking into Dr. Fauci's involvement with the Wuhan lab, the granting issues, his seemingly psychotic comments with regard to masking or not masking? I mean, he blew like the wind there for a while, and maybe telling the truth. I don't know. That seems to be the one area that people may scream politicization as soon as you go after or otherwise want to investigate anything related to Fauci because, the left, at least for whatever reason, views him as sort of God.
Well, here's one of the things, Brian. If you look at the deposition Fauci just gave, he's being sued by the AGs from Louisiana and Missouri. Mm-hmm. And in that deposition, they asked the right questions of Dr. Fauci. But 174 times he said, I don't recall, I don't remember.
I know. So he followed his lawyer's advice.
Yes, this is the new thing. The lawyer's interrupting.
It's not new. It's as old as litigation, my friend.
James Comey, I saw him do it. Very good at it. So, the bottom line is you work your way up to it because we have to talk to the people that do recall, that we're working with him, that do recall why he said this or why he sent this email.
And then you got to bring back in and say, okay, you said you don't recall. And here I have a document marked as Exhibit A in the deposition of, Sue Smith, where she says you said out loud at a meeting, blah, 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 blah. Does this serve to refresh your recollection? And do you now recall what your statements were at the time since you didn't recall earlier the last time we asked you the question? Like I said, if you say I don't recall to the initial line of inquiry, you've reserved the right to have your recollection refreshed down the road. Therefore, you have not been caught in a lie. If you said, no, I didn't say that, you've been caught in a lie. Pause for a moment. We'll continue with Congressman Brad Wenstrup. Brian Thomas here with Congressman Brad Wenstrup, walking through the issues. Well, we could, as I pointed out earlier in the program, Congressman Wenstrup, again, the list is so long. I know the hour that we have together is not going to be able to certainly satisfy my inquiries and everything I want to know about, but I just pulled up a list of topics, and one of the ones I have to ask you about is the situation in Ukraine. All right, I was joking around the other day. First, it's will we give Ukraine tanks or not? NATO's involved in the decision. Poland's screaming out loud, let us give them the tanks, let us give them the tanks. They're Germany's tanks originally. Germany's got a contract with Poland, which gives Germany the right to either authorize or not authorize the disposition of Poland's tanks. But Poland's clearly on board and wanting to give them tanks. And then here's the United States. Everybody turns their eyes to the U.S. Well, what do you say, United States? Are you going to give tanks as if we have the end-all, be-all say on the matter? That issue aside, 31, not 30, not 35, 31 M1 Abrams tanks. How do you arrive at that number? What is the big deal? And I say that not being a huge fan of the situation in Ukraine. Billions and billions of dollars. It's as if the money was in a pile already. It wasn't specifically authorized by Congress unless you got a slush fund, a war-waging slush fund. You got to answer these questions. And then, if tanks are now okay, Congressman, well, what about the jets they're clamoring for now? Is that some sort of line over which we can't pass? And if so, why is there a line? And what is it? What's the objective here? I'm confused. I think we can all reach that conclusion.
Well, I think that's the question, and that's, I think, what a lot of Republicans are asking. You know, look, we don't want Russia to take over Ukraine. You know, that's kind of a given, I think, on both sides of the aisle with this whole situation. Certainly a lot of funding just went out the door for Ukraine in the omnibus bill that, you know, we didn't support, but nonetheless was put out there. What we're asking on the Republican side, Brian, is where is the money going and what is the end game?
Yeah.
You know, and why this instead of that? You know, what's the strategy from a military standpoint?
Don't you have those discussions with our military leaders in these confidential behind-the-scenes committees?
We should be having those conversations on
Sounds like
Armed
no.
Services, Intelligence Committee, et cetera. And we should at least be briefed on the higher level conversations as to why they came up with this. You know, as I look at it, obviously, as you described it, Europe is very much concerned about Russia, right? Because they consider they're next, especially Eastern Europe.
Right.
And so they want to quell this. They want to put Russia back in its place. And so they want to see these things going there. But what you're talking about is a situation where it's kind of, I don't know, trickle down tanks, if you will.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, well, we gave them to you and you gave them to me.
This is obviously a proxy war. The West is arming the sole country, Ukraine. No boots on the ground, though. Everybody needs to make that perfectly clear. No, we're just sending all of the resources and having those guys do, some may argue, our dirty work in putting Russia down. Now you got a whole lot of nostalgia waxing folks from the Cold War and remember the Soviet Union and still view the Russians as the Soviet Union. I'm putting all that aside and just wondering, wait a minute, where is this going? Because there are generals now worrying about us being in the middle of World War III, which is certainly a possibility. As soon as NATO becomes directly involved in as recipients of a rocket launch or some military excursion by the Russians, there's World War III.
Oh, yeah, there's no doubt about it. This is the precursor in every way, shape, or form, and that's what you want to try to avoid. And the more that Russia, in my mind, the more that Russia is humiliated in this process, fine. But you said bring back the Soviet Union. That is Putin's goal. I mean, he's made that clear. He said that was a mistake. We never should have disbanded that, and he feels it's their right to reestablish that. And obviously, we don't want that. It doesn't make for a safer world in any way, shape, or form. So, you know, bottom line is, what are we hoping to achieve here? You know, how are we are going to achieve the ultimate goal? Russia, get back in your place. I don't know how much most of Russia really supports this. You know, they have a lot of their own kids coming back in body bags,
like Vietnam.
right?
It's like Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
I mean, 20 years worth of Afghanistan. So I know we didn't have the body bag level in Afghanistan, but a lot of people, me included, kind of scratching our head wondering, wait a minute, how long is this going? What are we doing there? What's the end game? We didn't have one, and then Joe Biden pulls the plug, and look what happens. It's like throwing 20 years down the toilet. We achieved nothing for the loss of life.
yeah, and if you're a Russian, you say, like, What are we gaining from this?
Yeah, they had Afghanistan too, and I'm sure that's fresh in the minds of some of the senior Russian people.
It's kind of like been there, done that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's the same thing. And, well, history loves to repeat itself, but I just think that's the accountability portion that we need to be informed about, and what are we hoping to achieve. And for me, Brian, it's like, if we're going to do things, that's fine, but I want a European match, right?
Of course.
To go with it, because this isn't just all about us. We're the least. We're the least of those in line that have the greatest risk. It's over there. It's Europe.
They're not on our border. They're on the European border. I get that. Real quick here.
And we're not protecting our border. Why are we protecting theirs?
There's that as well. Well, I know. We're going to get to immigration here. You know that's the topic of conversation for us today, Congressman Wenstrup. Just real quick, though, you talk about, as long as Russia's humiliated or continues losing, I can find any given day the number of Russians that have died in the Ukraine conflict is 15,000, and then there's somebody else over there that's saying no, it's closer to 300,000. I mentioned there's they blew up apartment buildings. The Russians indiscriminately bombing apartment buildings, and I'll get a call where the calls in and says no, the Ukrainians did that to themselves. I read it over here. The fog of war is always dense, and it's very difficult, particularly insofar as battlefield outcomes in any given skirmish. How many people died? Was land taken? Was land lost? We don't know. We have no idea. Do you get any concrete information about the realities of the battlefront in Ukraine? Because, pick your news source. We're either winning or losing, or Ukraine's either winning or losing.
The answer to that is yes, but the general public does not.
Yeah, I know. There's a problem with that.
When I get things in a classified fashion, then the idea is that the representatives of the people are there on behalf of the people, and that if the members of the Intelligence Committee come out and say the strategies are good or this is happening, but without going into detail, you hope that the American people will trust you. But unfortunately, what we've seen from people like Adam Schiff over the last 4 years, the American people don't trust. And social media is nothing more in many cases than Tokyo Rose.
That I agree with, but here, as I hear you say that, what we, the American people, are allowed to get from these quiet behind-the-scenes conversations that we're not allowed to get the actual numbers on is a political spin. We get to hear what makes whoever's policy objective clear. So we're winning, or the Ukrainians are winning, and they're doing really well because we want to continue funding this in order to keep Russia down and put them in their place. That may not be true, though, because the Russians are listening to what we are saying as well. I tend to be cynical and jaded about everything these days, Congressman Wenstrup. 628, 55 KRCD Talk Station. You mentioned secret documents. I'm going to ask him. He's seen a ton of them on the Senate Intelligence Committee. Congressman Brad Wenstrup knows what he has to go through to get confidential documents. We're going to learn the real truth on that one. Hey, happy anyway, because Congressman Brad Wenstrup's in studio walking through the topics, and Lord knows we have an infinite number of topics, but you alluded to confidential documents during our conversation about Ukraine. Obviously, whatever we hear as a public may have a spin to it. So it might not be what our elected officials tell us and presidents tell us may not accurately reflect the realities of any given situation like the war in Ukraine. But behind the scenes, they get access to the stuff you and I can't see. And Congressman Wenstrup, you having been on the Intelligence Committee, probably you see more confidential documents of all levels on that committee than pretty much any other. Would that be accurate?
For sure.
For sure. Okay, so you got the most sensitive documents all the way down to whatever the lowest level of confidentiality is. How could, and I know, for example, we've been told that Biden's documents may involve Ukraine and China and other highly, highly potentially sensitive issues, but we don't know what's in those. We have no idea what the documents were that Trump had at Mar-a-Lago. They haven't even given us a summary of what those might entail. But if it is the highest level of confidentiality, in your experience, how could a document like that get out into the wild and end up next to the Corvette in the garage, for example?
Yeah, so that's a real question. And let me just say this from the front. After Mar-a-Lago, I suggested that as Republicans, we don't go out as a conference and just start attacking the raid itself. Intelligence Committee, Republican Intelligence Committee came out and said, we want a brief on why there was a raid.
Yeah.
Because if there's this huge national security risk, we should be informed.
Of course.
This is our lane. This is where we have oversight. This is a government of we the people. So we should be informed of these as the representatives in that lane. Of course, we never got one, and we've made that request formally. We did the same thing with Biden, you know, when these documents came out. And really, same thing with Pence, you know, across the board. So how do these get out? That's the good question, right? Because I know when we're in that situation, you go from documents that are sensitive but not classified, you leave those there too. You know, but then
there is the SCIF.
In the SCIF.
Described as in the basement of the of Congress or whatever.
It's a secure facility. There's no windows around and things like that. So
no cell phones and photographic documents. You can't take a Xerox machine in there. You're not allowed to copy the documents. Are you supervised while you're looking at them?
Yeah, and that's the thing. So we gather around. We got documents in front of us. They're all numbered, and on the top, on the top and on each page, it says what level of classification it is, whether it's top secret, SCI, which is sensitive compartmented information. You know, that's very high level. It's all marked. And, you know, it's red borders around the top page. You know, you can't miss this.
Fair enough.
So also the staff makes sure they've collected every one of those things before we walk out.
Is a record made of the documents you saw? Like, it's Congressman Wenstrup. I had the top level of security clearance. I need documents related to that, and that. Do they make a list of the documents you look at when you're down in the SCIF?
You know what? I assume that there is, because you register to say, I'd like to see a brief on this, and that.
Okay.
So,
there's the document right there.
Yeah, you've asked for it.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but all this stuff, it should stay there. Matter of fact, most people
I hate to interrupt. Should stay there. I get that. That's the reason you're down there in the first place.
Yep.
How can you imagine, and I don't care if you're theorizing, hypothesizing, if it is a top clearance document, highest level of security, how could that document get out of the SCIF?
Exactly.
You don't know.
I don't know. I don't know the protocol at the White House. I don't know the protocol there, but I know
I'm not
our
being
protocol.
Accusatory. I'm going to put an exclamation point on it. In your experience, having the ability to see these documents, knowing what you go through to see them, it's like peace of God for you in terms of how it would get out of there and end up in Biden's garage if, in fact, that level document was one of the ones in the garage.
Yeah, and Biden or Trump, I can't imagine them just picking up boxes themselves and carrying them out.
Of course.
You know, this shouldn't happen. It's not supposed to happen. They know it's not supposed to happen. You know, the White House spokesperson, she says, the president takes classified material seriously.
Oh, I never heard that. She said that?
Yeah, well, no, I think she misread her teleprompter
4,000 times.
I think what she meant to say was the president takes classified material.
Seriously, he does take classified material.
Seriously.
Yeah.
I mean, so what's the role of the archives? That's one of the things we were talking off air. What is the role of the archives? To come at you 6 years later? Shouldn't the archives be approving anything you take out of there?
Archives should be boxing up the presidential documents, because clearly if you have the security clearance to work in the archives, unlike some of these private lawyers, you have the security clearance to see the documents, and therefore maybe you're the ones that should be boxing up the documents, regardless of who that person is packing up and leaving. More with Congressman Brad Wenstrup at 7:30 or 6:38, 55K. Congressman Brad Wenstrup for the full hour here. Going to move over to the southern border. We won't protect our own southern border, and yet, as you pointed out earlier, we'll give all the money in the world for Ukraine to protect its borders. Seems kind of contradictory, but part of the southern border problems includes the unbelievably unregulated, unchecked flow of fentanyl into our country, which is just a horror. But I always like to look at things more broadly in terms of, if you've got Democrat cities overwhelmed, as they claim to be, by the influx of illegal immigrants, they're the ones that claim they were sanctuary cities. So once the reality of calling themselves a sanctuary city sets in, because you send immigrants to sanctuary cities where they have been offered sanctuary, then they say it's a multi-billion-dollar problem. We can't handle it. You need to do something about it, federal government. That's a microcosm or a micro level of a larger macro problem we're facing in the country. We can't handle 5+ million people over 2 short years, let alone the numbers that have already been here. We've got to stop at some point. It's going to break. Congressman, what in the hell is going on?
Well, everybody knows what's going on, because it's been going on for years, and it's gone on long enough. You know, President Trump was on his way to try and curb this as best he could, physically try and curb it with a wall and with technology, and, you know, enhance our border patrol rather than try to demoralize our border patrol. And that's the situation that we're in right now. And, President Biden finally goes down to the border. Listen, I know enough about the cartels and how they operate. Are you kidding me? That's when they say, hey, he's coming to border on this day. That's a day off, everybody.
Well, they cleaned up the city. The city leaders cleaned the city up.
Yeah.
It was El Paso.
Yeah.
They cleared
make it
the
look
streets.
Better.
Yeah.
And actually, I've been down there, right across from Juarez, where the murder rate is through the roof. That's where the cartels are fighting each other, by the way, because it's a competitive business. But El Paso, it's a nice place. Overall, it's a nice place. They're the ones being inundated with it. I don't know why they played along necessarily with this, except that you always want to show off your city, I guess, for the President of the United States. But the cartels are saying, we're not working today. We're not going to put on display what everybody knows is going on. So you got now getting into the fentanyl issue. And it's been other drugs over the course of time. They change, the dynamic changes. I do have a bill that would make illicit fentanyl, because medical fentanyl is a good product, by the way, in anesthesia. Illicit fentanyl, which is killing Americans. 107,000 Americans died of drug overdoses.
Leading cause of death in young people, but like teenagers through like mid-20s or something.
Yeah, this is our next generation of Americans. This is our troops, right? This is our future, engineers, developers, workers. It's everything.
And not after public education is done with them. It's not, because there's no route to success in public education.
That's another knife in another wound that's created. But, now you start sending people to the vice president's home and to, Martha's Vineyard, and all of a sudden it's like, ooh, this isn't so great for us.
Right.
Whereas before it's okay for you, but you called yourself the sanctuary city, never thinking they'd make their way to your city necessarily. And so here we have it, right? So I think people are learning we got to do something about this. This is so damning to our country. We have, well, let's just go to
okay. And, going back to Biden visiting El Paso, or even if he stood on the border, even on its worst day, he doesn't really need to go there to know how bad the problem is, at least bad from our subjective analysis.
Your listeners
From his subjective analysis, he views it as good.
Yeah, your listeners know how bad it is.
I know they do.
And they haven't been there necessarily.
No,
right?
That's why it's sort of laughable that they cleaned the city up for Biden while he was there. I think that's just to avoid some sort of lasting photo shot of him standing in front of an unchecked wave of hundreds of people flowing across the border as it exists every single day. But he knows it does. This is part of the objective, I'm guessing. You can only reach that conclusion.
Well, a lot of things are photo ops, and so, but he goes down, look, there's nothing going on here today. Well, of course not. But this is a significant problem for the United States of America, and needs to be addressed, and needs to be addressed aggressively. And we can't do it with spin. You have to, talk in real terms. Look, there's people from the terrorist watch list coming across, and these are the people we're catching, Brian. You got to understand that they can't catch everybody. One time when I went down there, you had like 2 agents for a 25-mile course along the border that was pretty much without walls.
Well, the system is broke from our perspective. It's not broke from their perspective. I just like the situation in Ukraine. I just wonder what their end game is, and if they just be open and honest about what the end game is. Because right now, I weep for America, particularly given the situation with our social welfare safety net. Because the folks that are coming across the southern border are going to have a chunk of it. And if we don't have it funded well enough for our own people who've relied their entire lives in preparation for retirement on Social Security, for example, they're in for a real wake-up call. More with Congressman Brad Wenstrup. One more segment here with Congressman Brad Wenstrup. Wanted to focus on the budget argument. The Biden administration saying, absolutely not, we're not going to cut anything. What seems to be a constant, unquestionable reality is once you establish a program on a federal level, it never goes away. It only keeps getting bigger. Therein lies one of our biggest challenges. But you and I were talking off the break, so it's related to budget. The people who run our lives are not elected officials. I mean, painfully obvious to my listeners, but when you talk about term limits, you can say, go ahead, term limit me out. I'll be around for 2 terms, 3 terms. But then when I leave, the real problem persists, and they are very good at playing a waiting game. They'll wait out the anti-whatever they are administration. Of course, it obviously seems to be the swamp is totally leftist dominated. They'll wait out Trump and then hit the ground running back again when he's finally out of office with their assistance. What can be done? Congressman Wenstrup.
Well, we've got to bring back controls. And actually, I've seen some of this in a little bit of a bipartisan fashion, because some of the things that have happened in the intelligence community, for example, is they tell us as members of Congress that have oversight over them, it's our policy not to tell you this, not to tell you that. And we said, whoa. We are read in at every level. We have every clearance. Yeah. There's no reason not.
Tell me your policy. And you're accountable to us.
That's exactly right. And I said, in this one instance, I said, we're the representatives of the people in a country of we the people, and we have every clearance. You can't set a policy that says we don't tell you.
Right.
We fund your agency. We created your agency. And so even some of the Democrats started chiming in on that, saying, yeah, that's not being transparent. And yeah, we do have a job to know what's going on. As I said to them in this instant, I said, I want to work with the intelligence community. I want to be a partner with you, but I do have the responsibility of oversight, and you don't get to tell us that. To the point where one Democrat said, if you're not going to answer our questions, then it's going to be hard for us to support your budget. So that's the only control we have. So you ask, what can we do about it?
Right.
We've got to take back control by just telling them, you don't work with us, you don't get money.
Okay, let me just pose a hypothetical and I think legitimate, real response from them. Ha! Right. Biden would veto it if you try to cut our budget. So, go pound sand.
Well,
that's the line. That is their position. You know it.
Yep.
They know they're going to get their funding.
Well, and here's the difference, too, is now that we have the gavels, we have subpoena power. So some of the things that we would want to know, that we think the American people should know, or at least have some concept about through us, Adam Schiff, for example, on intelligence, he wasn't going to issue subpoenas to get to the bottom of things, because you know what? Hey, we're working together here. This is our administration. We're not going to berate our administration in any way. So the politics has got to be flushed out. You see bad behavior within the agencies, and there's no punitive measures. In the military, we have the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Unethical is unlawful. In those agencies, it's just like you have inspector generals come out, like the FISA court, and said, you did this all wrong. You violated the own rules that you have. But are there punitive measures?
There you
go. So that's a problem.
I know.
So that's one of the things we are working on is reform of, for example, the FISA court to say, if you violate these tenets that are there already in place, well, you're in trouble. You're going to jail. You're fired, whatever.
Thanks for waiting till we're out of time to bring up the FISA courts, which I have a fundamental problem with in their concept, let alone their application. Well, Congressman Wenstrup, it's been a lot of fun talking to you. Of course, lots of topics to go over and lots of questions remain. I've drawn my conclusions. My listeners will as well. And all I can hope is you keep pounding away at this and provide at least some concrete conclusion that will be an impetus to reform those behind the scenes who are so politically motivated. You've got 9 gajillion topics to do it with. And you mentioned looking into, say, the COVID origins. And I think of the litigations I've worked on in the past, teams of 20 lawyers at a firm, which are part of a larger group of other law firms in a complex litigation, and you dedicate almost your entire existence to one single case for a year or two. This is a slow investigative process. We're not going to see the light of day anytime soon. You only have 2 years to get something accomplished. And that's why I'm saying stick to something solid and something that can be used for demonstrative purposes to serve the benefit of reform for all Americans.
For future generations.
There you are. Congressman Brad Wenstrup, God bless you for coming in the studio. Appreciate the time we spent today, and I'll certainly look forward to it any time you